For your countries and counted your dead in the factories and mills, in the shipyards and mines. We've often been told to keep up with the times, but our skills are not needed. They've streamlined the job, and with slide rule and stopwatch our blind they'll rob die. But when the sky darkens and the prospect is war, who's given a gun and then pushed to the fore and expected to die for the land of our birth, though we've never owned one handful of earth?
Just a word about the Morning Star, which you see all around you. Now, some of you, quite a few of you know all about the Morning Star, but for those of you who don't, 5 days during the week and then again on weekends, the paper brings its readers news that you really wouldn't get anywhere else. News of the working class movement, news of the progressive movement, news about what's going on a day and daily basis within trade unions, and in terms of the fight back against the cuts. Every campaign going is represented as not just as adverts, but as news in the Morning Star. It's very important, although you can read the Star online, and many people do, it's really important that people actually buy the paper so that it can keep going, because it doesn't have commercial advertising. And so really, I hope that there will be some papers here, some past issues for you to take away, which I think will interest you. And then there are also copies of today's paper for sale at the bargain price of 80 pence, which is its actual price. And you're certainly welcome to buy the paper and to read it, and hopefully to get your newsagent to get it for you. I'd advise you to point out to your newsagent, if the newsagent hasn't yet ordered the Star for another customer, that it's the Morning Star and not the Star. I've had that experience. It was not happy. So you really want to get that straight. I think that's probably all I want to say about the Morning Star this evening. As someone myself whose early life and education was very heavily influenced by the songs and singers of the working class and progressive movement, I'm particularly pleased to introduce our topic, song and the working class movement, and the most appropriate person to take that topic up, Dick Gaughan. Dick.
Thanks, comrades, and thanks to the Morning Star for asking me to do this. I'm not used to speaking actually without a guitar in my hand. I get terribly insecure. I don't know who the guy on the poster is, by the way. It's,
your young brother.
My young brother. Really wee bastard he is. Actually, it's one of those photos I look as if I'm set for a fight. Anyway, it's good to be doing this. I'm not a speaker as such, but I'll probably take my while to get into my stride here. But I want to begin with two quotes that I think are pertinent, both strangely enough from playwrights. And the first was from Bertolt Brecht, and he said, "Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it." And the other one is from the Chinese playwright Cao Yu, and he said, "Art for art's sake is a philosophy of the well-fed." And both of those I agree with entirely. And they are pertinent, because music, like any other activity, it has to have a purpose. You know, you have music without a purpose, it's just noise. It can be very pretty noise, it can be very pleasant noise, but it's still noise, because there's no reason for it being there at all, apart from wallpaper filled in the background. And that kind of noise is outside the brief of tonight. Music doesn't exist in a vacuum, and I think all of us, the very fact that we're here tonight, we accept the reality of the class division of society and the antagonistic nature of class division that we live in at the moment. And music doesn't exist outside of that. Music is part of it. And I think one of the things that we should look at first is culture and the meaning of the word culture. And bourgeois society has limited the meaning of the word culture now until it comes down to intellectual pursuits, by and large. And from a Marxist point of view, culture is a way of life, an entire way of life. And it's worth reading Engels and Lenin in particular on this. And also, although those of us who have long memories will remember it being used as a way of undermining Lenin and attacking Lenin, but the Italian Antonio Gramsci had some very interesting things to say about it. It's worth reading on the whole question of hegemony and how the ruling class maintains cultural control, or control of the culture of our society. It should be self-evident that a small handful of people cannot control an entire society by brute force alone. Particularly at this stage in history, we have things like the democratic franchise and all the rest of it. We're seeing in the Middle East at the moment classic examples of small groups of people trying by brute force to hold on to their control of societies. It's impossible. It can't be done. The primary tool by which the ruling class keeps itself in power is, apart from its control of the economy, but the way that it convinces the majority of people to go along with them is with this illusion of culture, that there is one culture that is shared by the society as a whole. That extends to music, arts, everything within culture. Now, when you look at it from a Marxist point of view, each class has its own culture and its own way of life. And they are every bit as antagonistic as everything else, as the political relationship, the economic relationship. Cultural relationship is antagonistic. And this is something which has been greatly overlooked, I think, by large sections of the left, particularly in post-war Britain. There has been this bland acceptance of the fact that there is one culture, that music somehow transcends class, that it transcends politics, it transcends life, that it is this shared thing that all classes have in common, is this pool of music and pool of culture, and it's absolute nonsense. The only thing that has done is it leads us to the point where when Tony Blair stands up and says the class war is over, all the cultural things seem to back that up. It's absolute nonsense. And music has to be seen. If we're looking at it from a left perspective and looking at the question of music and its relationship to the working class, music has to be seen in a partisan way. It has to be seen in terms of class, and that the music, like all aspects of working class life, the music which emerges from the working class is actually antagonistic to the interests of the music of the ruling class. There are areas where we learn from each other because there are common principles at work, and there's a common history. But at this stage, it is necessary for musicians, composers, for the left in general, to look at it and to take a class view of music and what it means. You know, how many working class musicians there are, how many are working from a political point of view, how many are working from purely to advance the culture and way of life of the working class. And that is what people like me, is what we spent our lives doing and working for. Musicians, like myself, I'm from a working class background, but I do not conveniently, comfortably fit into any particular class. Musicians, by our very nature, we don't produce and we don't own the means of production. We have to ally ourselves in order to make a living. It's been this way throughout history. Musicians depend on patronage. And for a long period of time, it was patronage by dukes and barons and princes, whether that be Bach being patronised by the church and making his living by composing for the church, or whether it be people like Mozart and Beethoven accepting commissions from very wealthy people, all the way through. You have traditional musicians in Ireland who did the same thing. That musicians have to make a living, and so in order to make a living, we have to receive patronage from somebody somewhere. You know, whether it be charging 10 quid on the door to come in and hear a concert, it is still there. The waters become very muddied at this stage in our history, because it's not a case of coming, you know, people like me. I'm not in a position where I can go down to the RMT and say, pay me a wage in order to produce music. It doesn't work like that at this stage. In the past, I may have had to go and find a fairly progressive aristocrat and say, you know, pay me a wage and I'll compose music. So it's very much a kind of guerrilla warfare almost for people like me. You know, where do we place our allegiance? Where do we make our living? And how do we best fit into, for somebody like myself as a Marxist, where do I best fit into the class struggle, for want of a better way of putting it? How can I best use my energies at the same time as having to make a living? And the movement, as such, has never really addressed this question since possibly post-war times. There was the Workers' Music Association, there was Topic Records, which came about as a result of it, which to an extent offered a certain amount of patronage and a certain amount of income to musicians. But it was during a period when the Workers' Music Association was set up. It was at a period of time where there were some, I think, some serious mistakes made musically that are worth looking back at. There was this idea that somehow or another workers have to be educated into an appreciation of formally composed music. And it adopted the same bourgeois attitude towards traditional musics and folk musics. But the real revolutionary music and the real agitational music that was being produced was not being produced through formal composition. It was being produced at ground level by people like the Wobblies on the stage, Joe Hill and Ralph Chaplin, right through Earl Robinson, all these people in America in the early half of the century. And then post that, people like Woody Guthrie and the Almanacs, you know, the whole thing that was there. The truly working class music was not coming from the composer end. Now, there was a series of articles written back in the 1920s by the German composer Hans Eisler, who did a series of lectures called The Crisis in Music, and they were absolutely fascinating. I don't know if they're still available anywhere. They were published in the old GDR by Seven Seas Books. And Eisler was a refugee from Nazi Germany, for those of you not familiar with him. He wrote an awful lot of stuff together with Bertolt Brecht, and he did a lot of work with Brecht, but he was also a musicologist and classically trained composer, went to America, wrote music for film, and he had a lot of incredibly useful ideas about analysing the problem of what the difficulties that music was facing. But he was looking at it again, he was looking at bourgeois music and orchestral composition, and some of the stuff that he was saying back then is as vital now and to all forms of music as it was back then. But he was analysing primarily the world that he knew, which was the world of classical music. And he talked about the crisis in it, that it disintegrated into idiocy, pretty much. You had the abandoning of anything resembling melodic structure when you get into composers like Schoenberg and people like this. That it was looking for a purpose, music by that stage. In the early period when bourgeois capitalism was on the growth and bourgeois society was developing, people like Beethoven were revolutionary. Their music had a purpose, and you know, if you listen to the classic Beethoven's Fifth or Beethoven's Ninth, they are so confident as pieces of music. They're revolutionary in every sense, because he was writing music for and about the class that was in the ascendancy at that time, which was the capitalist class. And so his music represented that bourgeois revolution that was going on around the world. By the time, 100 years later, by the time we get into modern music, there were attempts made by the Eastern European countries, Soviet Union in particular, with people like Shostakovich and Prokofiev and people like this, to explore a new music. But it was still very much trapped within the old mindset of composed music as an intellectual pursuit, which is what it had become. And you can see in the places where the music suddenly did take on a purpose, a real purpose, like Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony. You feel it in the music, you know it's there, you feel the emotion and what the piece of music is about. Now, I'm kind of wandering through the past here in order just to set up what it is that I'm saying. By the time we got to the 1960s, and this is one thing which I think we really need to be very careful about, there was all of a sudden there was this thing called protest songs, which happened, and it was people, to paraphrase the Brazilian priest Camara. This is not quite what he said, but I'll paraphrase it to suit the argument here. When I say the poor have no bread, you call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no bread, you call me a communist. And the whole protest song movement, if you want to call it a movement, was all about saying the poor have no bread. It was all, isn't it terrible, this is all falling apart, this is blah, blah, blah. And it was all pointing to the things that were wrong. And pointing to the things that are wrong is easy. And particularly within music, to write songs about the things that are wrong is easy. It's the easy bit. To do, like the great Woody Guthrie had a wonderful quotation, which I was going to save it till later on, but I will read it to you now because we're on to this here. What he said was, outlining his reasons for doing what he was doing, he said, I hate a song that makes you think you're not any good. I hate a song that makes you think that you're just born to lose. Bound to lose. No good to nobody, no good for nothing, because you're either too old or too young or too fat or too thin or too this or that. Songs that run you down, or songs that poke fun at you on account of your bad luck or your hard travelling. I am out to fight those kind of songs to my very last breath of air and my last drop of blood. I am out to sing songs that will prove to you that this is your world, and that if it hit you pretty hard and knocked you for a dozen loops, no matter how hard it's run you down and rolled over you, I'm out to sing the songs that make you take pride in yourself and in your work. Now, the isn't it terrible songs don't do that. The depressive, pessimistic. I once sat down as an exercise, and I had this theory, when people said that Bob Dylan had sold out, I said, well, that's garbage, because he was never sold in the first place. Dylan was never a writer of political songs. He occasionally wrote political commentary, but it was all very negative. And I sat down as an exercise, and I thought, I'm going to find out anywhere in Dylan's entire canon of work that he advocates any kind of direct action whatsoever. And I found one, and that was in The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. And what he advocated was crying. And that was it. Now is the time for your tears. It's the only place I have been able to find in any of Dylan's songs where he actually advocated direct action. The rest of the time, now don't get me wrong, Dylan, wonderful songwriter, if you're not looking for anything constructive and forward-moving or progressive in his stuff. Very clever, very writes great tunes, great lyrics, if that happens to be what you're looking for. But if you're looking at it from a Marxist perspective or a left-wing perspective, working-class perspective, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. It's an empty vessel. It's playing with words most of the time, calisthenics with words. And there's no concrete base for it. Now let me expand just a wee bit on what I mean by this. Pick two examples of... You see, there is a danger, we really have to make the distinction between what is political propaganda, what is sloganizing, and what is actually progressive content in songs. Now there's places for all these things. There are places for sloganizing, there are places for writing propaganda and all the rest of it directly. But here's a couple of examples of, to me, what musicians or songwriters of the left should be aiming to do. And one of them's from Woody Guthrie, and I want to discuss these. From his song Pastures of Plenty, he wrote a song called Pastures of Plenty, which was a discussion of migrant labour into the States and the effect that that had on America. A lot of it was a complaint about how bad things were for the migrant workers and all the rest of it, but he had one verse in it that said this: California, Arizona have worked on your crops, then north up to Oregon to gather your hops. Dig beets from the ground, cut grapes from your vine, to set on your tables that light sparkling wine. Now, from a Marxist perspective, that is superb, because he's making the relationship directly between the labour of these people who work in the fields and the bottle of wine sitting on the table. Where does your comfort come from? Where does your luxury come from? It comes from the labour of these people out in the field. Brilliant. And the other example is this one. It's from a song about mining. It was written by the most unlikely person that you might think. It was written by Sting. It's a song called We Walk the Black Steam. And he has a phrase in it that could only ever have been written by somebody who came from a mining background. He said, "We walk through ancient forest lands and light 1,000 cities with our hands." Right? Again, the relationship between the work and the consequences of it, the benefits that society accrues from that work. Now, neither of those, you can sit down and say, well, these are great political songs, because they're not. But what they are is they're incredibly progressive songs. They're looking at life from a working class point of view. Now, it may sound strange to be saying Sting looking at it from a working class point of view, but he's from a working class area and has a progressive attitude to many things. But that 2 lines there in that song betray exactly where his head comes from, because you couldn't write that from a right-wing point of view. The relationship between society, what makes society function, and work that people do, that these 2 things are interconnected and that the one is dependent on the other. So that's just examples of what I mean when I say we have to draw the distinction between what is propaganda, what is sloganising, and what is actually progressive content in what we do. I was taught 3 questions by one of my great mentors, who was a literary professor called Jack Mitchell. And Jack used to say there are 3 questions you should ask yourself about everything you do. First, what am I trying to say? 2, who am I trying to say it to? 3, why am I trying to say it to them? And that stuck with me for a long time. And every single thing that I do, whether it be writing or playing or whatever, I ask myself those 3 questions. Maybe not in concrete form like that, but it's always there in the back of my head. What am I trying to say, and who do I want to say it to, and why do I want to say it to them? Now, if you're writing songs and singing songs that are saying, "Isn't it terrible?" Well, why are you saying that? Who are you saying it to? What is the purpose of telling people? Yeah, there can be, like, that's the job of journalists. That's the job of newspapers, is to tell people that it's terrible. What is going on, the hard facts. But art, music in particular, has to be more than dealing in hard facts. It has to deal with possibilities. It has to deal with ideas. When I write a song, I've seen something, and I want you not just to see, in a literal sense of the text of the song, to see what it is that I've seen. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to feel the reaction that I had to the event that I'm writing about. It can be a small thing, it can be a huge thing. Huge events don't happen very often in our lives, to the extent of, say, the miners' strike in 84, 85. During that time, that was a huge event, and songs had to be written which were about those huge events. But on a daily basis, small details of people's lives. Lane Russellson is superb at this. Russellson writes songs, he'd pick a detail and write a song about it, and can encapsulate, although he's not a Marxist, Lane's actually an anarchist, but, or maybe that's unfair, he's a libertarian socialist. Whatever that means. But Leon's songs, he has this ability to do that, to take an example of something and condense very profound ideas into simple things that people can grasp. And having said all that, we come down to the point about the movement. What is the relationship between the music of the working class, which may or may not exist yet, and the movement in general? What can movement do to promote and develop music and musicians? Well, I can tell you what it can't do and what it shouldn't do is what it's done in the past. Because I've turned up so many times, been invited to, and the Star is one of them. You get about, we're putting on a social at the conference where you come and sing. So you get there, and the speakers go on and everybody sits in rapt silence while the speakers are speaking, and rapt attention. And now we move on to the musical part of the evening, and everybody heads for the bar. And they head for the bar, and you stand there trying to deliver arguments across this chaotic thunder of people shouting at each other at the bar. Now, it is because we have never in this country developed an appreciation and understanding of the role that music in particular can play. So one of the first things that I would advocate is that we abandon the idea of putting on music as part of socials at conferences. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Put it on. Put it on and advertise it as a concert. Bill it as a concert of song in tandem with the other events. Don't have a bar in the room. Bad news. Bad news. Have a bar in another room. If people want to talk and they want to play. And it's understandable. People don't see each other from one year's end to the next. And they come together for a congress or a conference, and they want to talk, and they want to catch up with each other, and all the rest of it. And that's dead right. Provided you don't try and do it while I'm playing music. If you want to put on music as a background, hire a band. Bring in a band. Loads of MU members up and down the country are looking for work. Hire a band, put them in, let them play on the stage while everybody else gets pissed and talks. That's great, because that is not music that is meant to be listened to in a concert setting. If you're going to put on concerts with people like me, or Leon Russellson, or anybody else who's from the left, and who are singing songs of what we consider to be important, if I didn't think it was important, I wouldn't do it. I'd do something else. But it's the particular tools that I have at my disposal, and tools or weapons, call them what you like, but it's the part that I can play in my own way. It's the part I can play in pushing forward the interests of my class. And in order to do that, I have to be able to talk to people. I have to have people listening to me. If people aren't listening, what I'm doing is absolutely pointless. Because it's not pretty noise, it's not there as a background noise. If you want me to provide background music, you're off your head. Because you either listen to what I'm saying or it's crap. You know? What I'm saying might be crap anyway, but there's nothing in it. There's not casual, easy listening. It's difficult stuff. And so it demands a certain amount of concentration from the audience. And so therefore, putting it in its correct place is very important. You know, so if we're going to run events that we want to include political music in, have them in a setting that people can listen to. That to me would be the primary one. And understand as well that musicians need paid. Like, it's how I make my living. If I don't make my living playing music, I don't pay the rent, I get evicted, I'm homeless. So it's a job like any other job that musicians have to be hired. So like, I could spend my life, quite literally, I could spend my life doing benefit gigs. And I've spent the last chunk of my life doing benefit gigs and fundraisers. But somewhere along the line, I do actually have to earn a living if I'm going to keep doing this. And so, therefore, put on concerts, pay the musicians for doing them, and have them, you know, if it's a union conference, have the conference, have the social, have the General Secretary's dinner, but don't try and stick somebody like me into the middle of it. You know, make a separate event running in tandem for those that are there who want to hear what we've got to say. Which to me would be the most constructive things that the movement could do in that sense. But also encourage. I have started every concert I've done in the last 20 years with a song by an American songwriter called Cy Cannon. Cy was employed full-time by an American union to recruit, primarily as a recruiting thing. But he recruited people with songs. You know, that was how he did it. And his songs, there was active encouragement throughout the trade union movement in America. In some ways, they were more in advance on that than we are. But I want to return just for a minute to the, how would I ever think it? I'm rabbiting on and on and on.
But that's okay. And just to say, we will have the opportunity for discussion and questions. So
yeah, that's about I want to do. I'm standing on my feet here talking. I hate doing this. I'm much better at the question than something discussion. But the whole concept of protest song, again, be critical. Learn to be critical. Learn to dissect stuff. Don't accept it at face value. When a song, if you're a singer yourself, you're thinking of singing a song or writing a song, look at it. Say, what is this song really saying? Is it saying, isn't it terrible? Is it a beating breast kind of song? Or is there a purpose to it? Is it saying more than that? Is it saying, like those two examples that I gave by Sting and Woody Guthrie, is there something like that in it that offers some hope, that offers a clarification? Because we live in a time where the ruling class maintains its power by a complete stranglehold grip on all elements of culture.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, that was a musical punctuation. You know? And so there is this stranglehold thing. Music has been diluted down, particularly popular music, which is now part of the fashion industry, essentially. But the content of what was permissible, and it's very much a 20th century phenomenon. It didn't exist before the 20th century. But this idea that songs and music have to be about personal relationships. That it all has to be about me, and my broken heart, or your broken heart, and why I gave you a broken heart, or why you gave me a broken heart. And it's all going to be about that. Now, yes, the personal and the political overlap and integrate. You can't have one without the other. But in order to gain control, keep control, and make money out of music, the whole concentration narrowed down. Songs which are about, for example, 1931, a big hit in the United States of America was a singer called Gene Autry, who a lot of you will remember, with a song called The Death of Mother Jones. 1931. It was a big hit, huge hit. If it had been 10 years later, it had been hauled in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. But at that stage, in history, the stranglehold hadn't closed tight. And here was somebody who... Was Gene Autry the singing cowboy? Was that
Well,
Roy
he was
Rogers?
that was Roy Rogers, but he was also a singing cowboy.
Yeah, but he was... But, I mean, I stumbled across that completely by accident. I found an old recording of it, and I thought, what the hell is this? Gene Autry in 1931. Big hit. Mega hit. Mother Jones, Mary Harris Jones, the most dangerous woman in America, also known as the miner's friend, organiser, agitator, troublemaker. And here was Gene Autry singing this song about her. The world today is in mourning for the death of Mother Jones. And she was the miner's friend, and she organised labour and big hit in America. Yeah? And as I say, if it had been 10 years later, 1941, it had been hauled in front of the UAC and blacklisted. So by that stage, the stranglehold had set in through the various mechanisms like Hollywood and Tin Pan Alley and the whole bit. But everything was narrowed down to this one very, very limited range of topics. So the chances of actually saying anything within that field, within the field of popular music, there's very little chance of ever breaking through with that. And one of the arguments people have hit me with all my life. 1978, I walked away from RCA Records. Record contract, the whole bit, management, record. My one small taste of the music industry, and I got the fuck out of it as fast as I could. Because I thought, this is absolutely diabolical. This is not what I do, it's not what I want to do. Up until that point, I was quite confused as a kid. And every kid who's a musician wants recognition. That recognition within the world we live in tends to manifest itself in terms of wealth, privilege, and popularity. And so, in looking for recognition, sometimes the trappings become substituted for the real thing in the head, particularly among younger musicians. You think, I want to be famous. What it is you really want is you want recognition. You want people to say, that was great. But in order to do that, within our society, it means making loads of money and popularity, because all these things go together. So I had to look at it and think, this is not what I want. This is not why I became a musician. I've been a musician all my life. I never really wanted to do anything else. Served my time as a paper maker, but that was something to do until I could get enough work as a musician. And it was fairly devastating to discover that all of a sudden, all these things that I had thought were important when I was confronted with the industry side that controlled them, I realised it wasn't important at all. You know, these are the trappings of things. And I saw from the inside what it does to people, what it does to people's creativity. That if you intend saying anything significant at all that is of value to people's lives, and particularly if you take a class stance, then you're not going to get very far, because they will not allow it. It's as simple as that, because you can't make money out of it. You can't make money. And it always comes down to that. That's where the conspiracy is. Can you make money out of it? And so we have to have, for future generations, I've been working, I've been doing it long enough, and I've set up to an extent a circuit that I work over the year, and I can make a living. But for younger musicians, the ones who are all drifting into being snaffled up and destroyed by the so-called music industry, we have to provide, from a working class point of view, we have to provide a way whereby we don't lose these people. Where these young kids can come in and be part of the movement because of what they're doing. They can contribute what they're doing to the rest of us, to the movement in general. And in this country, at the moment, we're appallingly bad at it. It's as simple as that. It just doesn't exist. And we really need to take that on board. We really need to look at what it is we can do to set up alternatives for younger people, which will bring them into the movement rather than driving them off elsewhere. It's back to that question earlier on about patronage, and how do we help them to make a living, but how do we also help them to maintain true to what it is that they're trying to do and that they've set out to do. And with that, I'll...
Thanks very much.